like to introduce Senor, the Startup Nation guy, and a man who's been very good to Kellogg School of Management, Immelt.
Good morning. Good to be here with everyone. And Jeff, thank you for being here. Jeff Immelt is someone who needs no introduction, certainly to this audience. The GE story is well told, and his leadership at GE is well known. What I think may be less well known, although probably not for this audience, is the amazing work that GE has done in Israel, the degree to which GE relies on Israel, Israeli innovators, Israeli entrepreneurs, and Israeli inventors. We want to spend a little time this morning talking about Jeff's both personal history in Israel and GE's work in Israel. You were recently in Israel and gave a talk, and you said something that I thought was quite profound and spot on, which is, you said, look, Israel is really good, and I'm paraphrasing, you said Israel is really good at innovation. And companies like GE are really good at scaling up, taking small ideas and turning them, making them work at a really big level. And that's the magic, that's the secret sauce, to take Israeli inventors and Israeli entrepreneurs and their incredible problem-solving skills and ideas and marrying them with companies like GE and enabling them to scale up around the world. Now I want to get to that theme, but before we do, can you just spend a few minutes telling this audience about your history in Israel, how you got started getting engaged in Israel, and how GE got involved.
Great, so good morning, everybody, and it's great to be here with you. And I have so many great feelings and memories of doing business in Israel. So in 1996, I'm a long-term GE guy, so I'm 31 years with GE. You know how you build a career and you work in different businesses, stuff like that. So in 1996, I took over a medical business, which was in those days just diagnostic imaging. And I'm going through a set of reviews, and it's GE, Siemens, Philips, Toshiba, and a company called Elcent. And it'd be 30% market share, 25, 5. And then I would sit with our technologists and engineers and say, okay, who has the best technology? Siemens? No, Elcent. I said, they only have 2% market share. He said, yeah, but they have great products. So roughly 6 months later, I went and met with the guys who ran Elcent. They were in 1997. They were in the CT, and this was, the holding company was Elbit, Military Electronics, and then they had a healthcare company called Elcent that did diagnostic imaging. And I met with the leadership of Dan over time, and I ended up buying as many of the Elcent businesses as I could. Over the space of 12 months, we acquired it. We couldn't buy CT because our share was too high, but we bought their MR business, their nuclear business, their ultrasound business, and we did a joint venture with one of the founders in Europe to do medical imaging. We paid something like $180. It was one of the first deals I ever did. I paid $180 million. We paid $180 million. I thought it might be too much. It was probably worth $3 billion, right? Just because the technology was so good, the people were very proficient, and we could blow it through. In the end, when I come here today, not through any greatness of my own, but GE has 50,000 scientists and engineers and 40,000 salespeople. You can do a lot of damage with 50,000 engineers and 40,000 salespeople. So we were able to take that great technology and that great innovation and just blow it through the GE system, and that's how I first got to know Israel.
And it's been said about Israel that it's not just ideas there, but there's something else going on. And when people think of innovation, the conventional wisdom is innovation is sort of synonymous with ideas. And one of the measures of ideas, the metrics of success with ideas, are patents. Now, if you look at 3 countries in the world that have the highest patents per capita, it's Finland, Korea, and Israel. Now, what's interesting about Finland and Korea, a lot of patents, a lot of ideas, not a lot of startups. Israel, highest density of startups in the world. So it's not just patents that's producing startups, not just ideas, it's something else. Now we argue in Startup Nation that it's a combination of mission orientation and the culture there that takes this key ingredient, ideas, that are manifested in patents, intellectual property, and then they do something with it. So can you talk about the culture of these companies you were interacting with, the mission orientation that you saw, that is, we think is sort of central to the secret sauce?
So I think mission orientation, clearly you can't be in Israel or around people in Israel without having, it just drives with a sense of pride in nation, a sense of needing to do more, needing to do better. But the other thing that I would mention is the military background. Everybody, when we hire military people in the GE every day. We have almost 15,000. You're more self-confident. I think if you're young, early on in your life and your career, you spent a couple years in the military, you're an electrical engineer or something like that, you just have more confidence in yourself. So you marry the ideas, the innovation, with the self-confidence to say, I can do this myself. I don't need necessarily the backing of a big company. I can go out and do this on my own. And I think that's what makes Israel unique, is this mission-based, but the fact that everybody has a self-confidence that's not apparent when you go to other countries around the world.
Now, GE is playing the innovation ecosystem globally, not just in Israel. So I guess two questions. One, what is in a nutshell, what is the GE strategy for innovation globally? And then secondly, where does Israel fit into that?
So, our company is, in excess of $150 billion. So we're a big industrial company, almost $110 billion. So we're about scale. We're about big infrastructure ideas driving scale. So what we do, Dan, is we try to take, the core businesses we're in, healthcare, energy, oil and gas, water, the big infrastructure technologies, aviation, and we break those into what I would call investable themes. So, within each of those businesses across the company, we might have 15 or 20 big secular themes that we're investing in. And then we look at, best in breed. So we do a lot of work ourselves because we have the need to scale things. But we need entrepreneurs, we need venture capitalists, we need universities, we need an ecosystem of technology to be successful. So when I look at Israel, I look at everything around healthcare and healthcare electronics. You still see as good of the technology base in Israel as anywhere in the world. I think lots of technologies around energy efficiency. So this might not be the place that does, big gas engines or things like that, but inverter technology, power electronics, I think Israel is dominant in some of those spaces. So those are two core, I would say, affordable healthcare, renewable energy, big places where Israel has a big fit. And then the third one I would talk about, or maybe interrelated, is cybersecurity and analytics. I think for every company, you have to be basic in cybersecurity. You probably see more good technology in Israel today than any place in the world. And the power of analytics is going to be, very leverageable in Israel. So when I look at maybe 4 or 5 of the big investable themes in GE, Israel's going to have either companies or people that can play in a big way in all those.
So it's focusing on analytics. I was recently talking with Eric Schmidt from Google, who we interviewed for Startup Nation. And he said, when you first interviewed me for this book, I thought, they're sort of onto something. There's the role of the military that you're speaking to in terms of leadership training, that crucial leadership experience. He says, but what I didn't realize at the time is you were understating. You and your co-author were understating how central, sort of how ahead of its time, Israel's innovation economy is. Because he didn't anticipate at the time, which was several years ago, that the moment we would be in now is where the innovation and technology world is focused on is data analytics. And that's traditional computer science. That is the sort of the center of the storm. And that is exactly in Israel's wheelhouse, the analytics piece. Can you
Yeah, so I'd say, look, we're what's new today is that every big iron company like GE, so we make jet engines, big complex systems. All of us are now in the analytics business as well. All of our technologies have sensor technology that's a part of it. We have, let's say, 60 or 70% of the world's installed base of commercial engines. if we can get 1% more fuel efficiency in our fleet of jet engines, it's worth $3 billion of profit for the airline industries around the world. 1%. So the way you do that is you take a terabyte of data coming off a jet engine, which we monitor continuously, and you model new ways to manage that engine. So GE's in the analytics business. In other words, it used to be just the Googles or the Microsofts or people like that. Now, if you're an industrial company, you give this up at your own peril. And so we've opened up a center. Bill Rue, who will be talking later today, we've got a big center now in San Ramon, California, but that ultimately has to be in Israel. Bill's looking at a set of investments in Israel, India, and places like that. So I think this is, again, is one of the secular themes where Israel has a natural fit in terms of where it's going. Cybersecurity, again, I think just this imminence of military electronics, which is where Israel, that's like ground zero, right? In terms of where everything grew in Israel had to do with probably for 2 decades this dominant position in military electronics. Now, cybersecurity is a natural with that. So you get these concentric rings, and I think the challenge, because in the end, I'm here as your friend and adoring, well, when I leave here, I'm comparing you to India, China, every place else, just to be honest.
It's just full disclosure.
So I'm stacking you up with every other researcher we can get any place in the world. And I think it's always important that you know your own core competency and where it comes from. And I think in those areas, in analytics and cybersecurity, Israel's going to have it massively as time goes on if it keeps developing the companies and things like that.
So you're here, as you said, as friends, so we can speak among friends, be very candid. One challenge, shall we say, that many multinational companies have when they're dealing with Israeli companies and Israelis is they say, look, fantastic leadership skills, fantastic technical skills, great instincts, great work ethic, ethos, but Israelis are sometimes hard to work, loosely defined. We tell this great story.
You said it, not me.
That's right. No, we have this great story in the book when Intel, which ultimately wound up exporting something like $1 billion out of Israel a year out of Intel. Israel is the second or third largest employer in Israel after the government. Huge operation. But the pioneers of Intel Israel, when they're building the Intel operation, the executives come from Santa Clara, California. And you'd have like some junior Israeli engineer, just out of the army, meeting with some senior executive that's come in from California. You'd think that this junior engineer would be very deferential. The big boss is coming in from overseas. And they'd sit in a meeting, and there's one Intel executive from the mothership tells the story. He'd sit in a meeting with a junior Israeli engineer, and the first thing out of his mouth to the senior executive was, "Why are you my boss? Why am I not your boss?" Which is very Israeli. But another great story out of Intel was that one senior executive from Intel was like walking through the Intel facility, American, and he walks by a conference room and he's yelling and screaming, and it seems like chaos, like the place is about to explode. And then one of the Israelis walks out of the meeting, and the American says, "Is everything okay? Is everything okay?" He goes, "Oh yes, we just wrapped up a very productive meeting." It's very Israeli. So do you this cultural divide, is it a real divide? Is it more myth than fact? Or is it just sort of the price of doing business that actually is healthy? That this sort of, because a lot of it comes from the military. It's a very anti-hierarchical military in Israel. There's a huge emphasis on pushing authority and decision-making down to the most junior ranks of the military, unlike most militaries in the West. And so part of that ownership of responsibility and willing to challenge authority is unique, but many Israelis argue it's central to the innovation mindset there, that they're willing to challenge conventional things.
I think, Dan, I think it's true. In other words, my own personal experience, I see a little bit today, and that the art of GE is the mission of doing something big. That's why we exist. I mean, we exist to solve big problems, to do big systems, to make size an advantage and not a disadvantage. right? So when we buy those companies like the ones I talked about at New Ventures today, we say, hey, join the team. And what we bring is all these salespeople, all these engineers, the power that, the sixth most valuable brand in the world, we can scale things. And that's what's appealing about us. Now, a typical entrepreneur, and I would say an Israeli entrepreneur, although not so different than everybody in the world, wants all of that, but doesn't want to join. Wants all the good stuff and none of the bad stuff.
Right.
And so, that's a problem. So I think, and this has taken me time, is understanding how to get the best out of the people we partner with. And sometimes it means we shouldn't buy a company. We should take an equity stake and leave them on their own. Or we should, when we bought some of the companies, some of the senior leaders had to leave because they just didn't want to work for someone. Right. And so I think I don't take it as judgmental. I just think it's one of those things that it is true. There's a sense of independence of I would rather be king of my idea, even if it's small, than being part of the
big bureaucracy, big machine.
The big machine. And so I think there's a healthy, I view that as a healthy tension, because I think what I found with all the people I did business with or do business with in Israel is you can have an immediate, frank discussion that's two-way without hurting anybody's feelings.
Right.
And that's not as easy other places in the world.
No, of course, the two euphemisms. Israelis are independent thinking and frank.
No, and I think, and we tend to be the same way,
Right.
So I think you get, but, the last time I went back to Israel, I saw neither one of us are young anymore, but he was the young engineer whose idea was to do a PC-backed ultrasound in the late 90s, which was now a no-brainer, but in those days was revolutionary. He still works for us. But he's seen the benefit of his idea turn into a $2 billion business, right? So there are people that are here that have seen what scale can be.
Right.
And I think I think this is just a lesson that every big company has had to learn, Dan, not necessarily unique to Israel, is how to be a good partner to entrepreneurs, to startups, to small companies. And that is a learned art. It doesn't come naturally. And I think that's something we've learned. I say particularly in Israel, but everywhere. We're taking it everywhere we go.
You mentioned what GE is doing in terms of its recruitment, and I've read a lot about it. Very admirable, important recruitment of military men and women coming on the battlefield to the GE team. This is obviously a big part, as you said, of Israel's success. That every Israeli is literate, can read a military manual, right? So if you're a young Israeli just coming out of the military, you're trying to join a startup or raise capital for a startup or join a big multinational company, you sit down in a meeting with the person who's interviewing you or to whom you're presenting, and the first question they ask is, what unit did you serve in the military? And they can immediately hear the name of the unit and figure out, it's like a reference point for your skill set, your background. That's not the case in the United States for many reasons, not the least of which is most people in Israel serve in the military. Here, we don't. But we tell these stories in Startup Nation. A young American military officer, Army officer, is applying for a job in Silicon Valley, a company that I won't mention the name of which, but it's a household name. And the recruiter is saying to this young officer, tell me about your experience. And this young officer is talking about his time in Fallujah and Iraq, and tremendous interdisciplinary skills he developed, and the improvisational skills. He went there to be to fight a war, and he wound up opening schools and having to be a tribal negotiator, and was learning, basically became a part-time mayor. And the skill set and the negotiation skills and the leadership skills that he learned were amazing. He's describing all this experience from the battlefield, and at the end of the interview, the recruiter said, well, that's all very interesting, but have you ever had a real job? And by the way, we hear this all the time, that there's this disconnect here between military experience and how that can translate to a business context. And many American military people have commented to us that it's not the case in Israel. There's a tremendous, it's not just an understanding, there's a value put on what these young IDF soldiers and officers, the experience they gain and how it translates into a business experience. So GE has made a big push on this. Again, hats off to you. And what's the experience been?
So we've joined. So we hire about 1,000 vets every year in the United States, and we enter them into either kind of what we call JLP, which is Junior Officer Leadership Program. So we take the people that come off as lieutenants or captains or things like that, and then infantrymen or people like that. We put them into high school manufacturing and other training programs. And we worked with 6 other companies to get just to your point, get a translator so that we can go from military training and do a kind of online, translate that into what they're able to do in our operations. And so that is a huge gap that a country like Israel doesn't face. But again, self-confidence, leadership, skills. And then for a company like ours, we're in 160 countries around the world. So we need people that are confident going to Algeria to build a power plant, or going to Indonesia to drive a locomotive, or things like that. And we find that the military folks are just more culturally diverse, more self-confident in terms of where they go. But that spirit is very much, I mean, you can never deny that spirit is very much part of what's made Israel so damn competitive, right?
Yeah.
There's a technical foundation for the military, there's a leadership foundation for the military, and those have both kind of joined to make Israel one of the most competitive places in the world.
Well, one other factor that we talk about, I'm sure you've experienced, and it's relevant to the current political debate going on in the United States right now, but I don't want to get into politics, but the role of immigration. There's over 70 nationalities represented in Israel. 2 out of every 3 Israelis is either an immigrant, the child, or immigrant, the grandchild. And there are, Jews who moved to Israel from Ethiopia, the former Soviet Union, the United States, Australia, Iraq, and Iran. And you go back to the academic literature of Michael Porter and the study of an economic cluster. The idea that in a cluster you can have this high concentration of people, energetic people, from all over the planet in one place, who maintain their networks around the world, who speak the languages of the countries from which they came. And they also have this sort of immigrant ethos. We argue in the book that immigrants are the ultimate entrepreneurs. Their whole lives are servants. They know what it's like to come to a new place, to overcome adversity, to build something new, to have to improvise every single day and be really flexible and learn new skills, and to have a country with this high concentration of people who've gone through who've overcome the challenges of starting something new in a place that's foreign to them, and maintaining these networks around the world at a time that our economy puts so much emphasis on globalization, is like just a jolt to Israel's innovation economy. And we here in the U.S. are wrestling with some of these issues right now in terms of the role of immigration in our economy. And I'm just curious, basically, what you see in Israel.
I think we got to have high school in immigration and immigration reform in the United States. It's something that every business person pushes for. It's something that every politician agrees with behind closed doors, right? So this is something that's eminently doable and possible. It's got to happen. When I worked with a bunch of other private sector folks on the President's Jobs Council, one of our initiatives was to graduate 10,000 more engineers in the United States. When I travel a country, the first thing I'll ask the president of a country is how many engineers you graduate every year. Right? That is a symbol of how competitive that country is going to be. Now, 2/3 of the presidents I asked them to have no idea how to answer the question, which tells you something in and of itself. I would say including some parts of the United States, although we point out to the president how many we had, so I know he knows. So I'd say this combination of how do you survive with each other, plus a real focus on education and technology, again, is what makes people competitive. And good entrepreneurs don't take no for an answer. They know how to survive and make it inside of a culture that is pushing back and things like that. And I think, again, that's part of the spirit in Israel, wherever it came from.
Right.
Forever. Yeah.
So just in the remaining few minutes that we have, so you started going to Israel in the early 90s. You told me you were going there about 3-4 times a year. One question is, did you, as Gene was becoming so dependent in a good way on Israel, Israel's in the news. It furnishes a lot of daily headlines that we read about the Middle East, and it's often a heavy subject, a weighty subject. Given that GE does business in so many other parts of the world, did you ever experience any blowback, any pressure, or was it just, we got to do business, we do business all over the world, Israel's one of the places we do business, and it's not negotiable?
So first, I'd say, first and foremost, we're proud to be in Israel. You guys should know we are extremely proud to be there. I have to say, our operations are all in Haifa, because that's really where the Medical Valley was in the country. I would say in most of the operations, I've been to 100 countries now myself, and most of the operations, I don't pay attention to where the bomb shelter is.
Right.
In Haifa, I actually look at it because people actually use it, since I've been CEO, so it is a different tenor. But look, we are big, Dan, throughout the Middle East, and we never kind of pretend like we're not in Israel, or that when we're in Israel, we're not in Saudi Arabia and things like that. I just think it's, business has a tendency to be more about who can be the best, who can be the most competitive. And I would say geopolitics intersect with business, but it's really the driver. And I think it's, companies like GE only survive because we have this unyielding thirst to be competitive. To find the best ideas, to find the best people, to not be bureaucratic about it, to really want to go to where the best people, the best ideas win. And we're proud to be in Israel because it's a place where there's great people and great ideas and great opportunities. And nonetheless, we still do business around the world, but we're proud of that.
Very last question. Yeah, absolutely. Started going in the early 90s, focused on healthcare. You talked today that you see tremendous competitive and comparative advantage in Israel in the areas of cybersecurity and data analytics. If you were coming here to the Israel Dealmakers Summit in 10 or 20 years and talk about what you're doing in Israel, just looking at your crystal ball now, what do you think you'd be talking about? Where do you think the Israel-GE partnership is going in innovation?
So, I think this whole area of analytics is, I grew up, I'm a 30-year GE guy. I grew up with people saying, software is for somebody else, not you, right? You guys are machine heads, right? You're mechanical engineers. So I would say, Dan, one dimension is I want GE to transform itself into. I don't ever see us. We don't look at Microsoft or competing in social, social networking like a Facebook or Google. But I want GE to be an awesome local company in Israel. I want to be part of that future. Number one. And then number two. This whole focus on innovation and technology in driving affordable healthcare. The innovation is going to take place probably in places outside the United States. So if I could marry the ideas in Israel with a market like India and could bring it back to the United States, right? If you could develop the next generation of low-cost, mobile monitoring devices, imaging tools that are mobile, that are digitally based, that can be connected, that can be done inexpensively. I think that's where healthcare goes next. So this is the ideas, the ideas in Israel that I see when I go there, married with mega markets that are moving fast, like India, and then packaged for the U.S. So I would say analytics on steroids, and the next generation of affordable healthcare tools. We are in like the first minute of the future in terms of where that goes. And how do you get them commercialized and stuff like that? I'd say those would be the two most exciting, and then there'll be three more that you and I
didn't think of, right? Exactly.
That's just the way the world works, right?
Thank you both for what you do at GE, for what you do around the world, and for what you do with this incredible partnership with Israel. It's a real honor to have you here. Jeff,
thank you very much.
I don't know if you've ever been referred to as a metaphor, but we have
Referred to as many things, never a metaphor.
It was a great conversation, but what you have here is a metaphor for the startup nation, for that engine of entrepreneurship at the early stage, and a metaphor for the large corporation. Now, Jeff, you said the art of GE is the art of doing something big. Now, it kind of rolls off the tongue. You probably say 160 countries, 160 times a week. But think about what this means. This is never before in history have large corporations been able to create so much change in the world at such scale. It's truly breathtaking. The companies that are going to win, large companies that are going to win, and I'll stake my reputation on this, are the ones that become great at engaging with small companies, with entrepreneurs, because it's really hard. And you talked very candidly about that learning curve. It's really hard, but when you can bring the new together with the scale, nothing's better. Thanks so much.